Hi, everyone. Before we get into this episode, I just wanted to come on and share a couple of announcements, a couple of updates and opportunities that are available for you. I am still taking the summer off, not doing any new personal episodes as I'm spending time with my kiddos this summer. So today's episode is a throwback episode. I am choosing only the episodes that I think are incredibly valuable, that I want to make sure the content is shared and is well known. So perhaps you've listened to this episode before, maybe you haven't. Either way, I encourage you to tune in and to listen. I think that there are some really valuable truths that Julie Dean shares in this episode when it comes to understanding the history of the divine feminine, of Heavenly Mother, what happened to her, the fact that she was incredibly present in ancient times and is now being restored. So I'm excited to share this with you. I did want to say too that even though I am not recording personal episodes right now, I am learning so much this summer that I am just thrilled to share with you. I have been learning more about the nature of masculine and feminine and how that manifests in us and why it's important. I've been learning more about the cycles of transformation, how to orient ourselves when we're in the midst of life, and understanding where we are and where we're going, and being able to embrace every season that we're in. I've been learning more about the 7 thresholds of the veil and all of these different things that we are constantly being invited into in order to part veils, in order to see more clearly who we truly are and to embody that version of ourselves in the flesh. And so if you've been with us for a while, I encourage you to stick around because I have all sorts of incredible content just around the corner in the fall. With that in mind, I wanted to encourage everyone, if you haven't already joined our newsletter, I invite you to do that. I am still sending out regular email updates. You can do that by going to meganfarner.com and signing up for our app for free. And when you do that, we do have a brand new polarity assessment that is available for you. So if you are interested to know where are you at with your own inner masculine and feminine, how healed are you, and where are opportunities for improvement, that polarity assessment is going to be a fantastic resource for you. So again, you just go create a free app account and it'll take you right to the polarity assessment. You can find it under account settings, my journey, coaching is where you should be able to find that assessment. So I invite you to take that if you haven't already. And then finally, enrollment is now open for the next cohort of Return to the Garden, which is our 12-week women's group mentorship experience beginning this September, at the end of September. If you've been longing to heal shame, to reconnect with your divine identity, deepen your relationship with God, and experience genuine transformation in a supportive community of women, this is exactly for you. Together, we'll be exploring what it means to return to the garden, not as a place, but as a state of being, a way of living that is rooted in our wholeness and in truth and in divine love. So, as I said, enrollment is open. If you register before July 31st, you can receive $100 off with code GARDEN26. So I invite you to do that. You can learn more and reserve your spot at meganfarner.com, return-to-the-garden. That link is in the show notes. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. But again, invite you to check that out and to join our newsletter so that you can stay up to date on all of the things that we are learning and opportunities that are coming. I'm so thrilled for what we have in the near future. Again, what I've been learning and most especially how I look forward to teaching and to experiencing with all of you. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and jump into today's episode. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Hidden Wisdom. Hidden wisdom exists to initiate truth seekers into the mysteries, gently guiding them toward a lived experience of the divine that awakens and transforms faith without dismantling family or community. This work is about faith renovation and expansion, learning how to inhabit your spiritual foundation more fully, allowing for depth, relationship, and wisdom to grow over time. I'm your host, Megan Farner. Here we explore Christ-centered esotericism, spiritual discernment, embodied wisdom, and the path of initiation, so your faith can mature, deepen, and become more alive. If you're seeking more and wanting to grow with care and integrity, you are in the right place. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Latter-day Disciples podcast. We have some really fun things that we're going to talk about. This episode is for our audience members who really are feeling a pull towards the feminine. Obviously, that's something that has become a regular theme of our show, is understanding the dichotomy and the symbolism of masculine and feminine, and also figuring out how we as women can embody the feminine to become more like God and to live the gospel as women. So this episode is particularly for those who really want to lean into that. We're going to talk about some maybe like key features in some ways of femininity and studying femininity and some of the things that that can elicit. And then we're going to transition into maybe some unique places that you haven't thought about that we really do see the feminine. And finally, we're going to top it off with a really special discussion about a resource for all of you to consider that will help you to learn more about the feminine and how to live in your feminine. So, again, very excited for all of that. Julie, my dear, would you mind introducing everyone to yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. It's been so exciting to be here, and we've been trying to do this for a while. So we'll see how it goes, right? We're just handing it over to Heavenly Father to see, what will come through. But yeah. So my name is Julie Dean Richards. I'm an attorney and I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was a researcher for 7 years. I actually worked for really high touch clients like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, of course, big tech giants, Google, Amazon, telling them and teaching them how to do their research. I spent 7 years in that. And then after that, I decided to go to law school. But it was really then that I started to be pulled into learning about the feminine. And I am a linguist. I speak 5 languages. I do not speak Hebrew fluently, but I do understand a lot of the concepts because they're similar to some of the other languages that I speak. And I'm also surprise, surprise, I'm an astrologer. So I study the stars, I study the signs in the heavens. And that wasn't a path that I, at first in my life, thought I'd ever be pulled down. In fact, I was pretty against it for most of my life until I felt God whisper to me that I needed to learn more about it. And I did some deep research and how does this work with the gospel and how can, these things be true? But what I've overwhelmingly found for myself is that God is in everything and that our heavenly parents, they really do love us. They're in the details of our lives and that they are there. You just have to look up that their timing is divine. They know what they're doing and that we can see them all over the earth. We can see them in the heavens and they encourage us to look to there. And they're not trying to put us in a box and they're not trying to make us fate us to do anything terrible or bad or anything like that. They give us our choices, our agency, but they also are always asking us to look to them and showing us their divine timing. So I guess that's a little bit about who I am. Is that good?
Yes, yes, that was great. Julie is a great friend of mine and seriously like one of the coolest people ever. Like I just love how she plays in all these different fields and like her talents are really that varied. Like she's able to do that. She's a projector if anybody studies human design, right? No, you're not. You're a
I'm a
reflector. You're a
reflector. I'm a
reflector.
reflector. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know anything about human design, you guys, but I know she's a reflector and that means she can do a lot of cool stuff. So anyway, thank you so much for that introduction. So I want to start I actually want to start at the topic of fear and why it is that things that are actually really inherently feminine and that very much lend to helping us as women lean into our femininity oftentimes are very fear inducing. So, like, for example, you mentioned astrology. And like you, like that was something I never looked at. I had heard, I think there's some maybe traditions in the church that suggest that that's not good, or that that's dangerous or something like that. Or it's just, um, not real, like it's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
made up. It's not really a thing. Either way, there are these influences and things that we're taught to kind of influence us not to go down that road. And there's a fear that's attached with anything, right? That we are told has the potential to be deceptive, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
we talked about on the show it's kind of a moot point because we're all under some deception to it one degree
Yeah.
or another, right? All the time. But that being said, I want to talk about like why is there a fear that seems tied to a lot of the things that actually are expressly and inherently feminine?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces to this, right? This is a great question. There's lots of pieces. And actually, just this morning, I was listening to David Butler's book, J. David Butler, Adam, in the language of Adam. And he talks about this with the allegory of the olive tree, which I know that you have probably talked about, Jacob 5 for
Not on the
everybody.
show. We have it
Not on
on the
the
show. It's
show.
in the
Oh,
book.
okay.
Yeah. So this is a great thing to go into. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I will just give the theory, okay? Like the short theory. It's not going to go so in depth, right? But let's just take the allegory of the olive tree for what it is, right? There are these trees and there's this vineyard. And we kind of figure out by the language of them saying, let's go down into the vineyard, let's go to the nethermost parts, and let's go back up. That it seems like we're kind of in this vertical sphere. Like maybe this is a vineyard. If you've ever been to vineyards in England, like I don't know why someone would have probably in this audience, maybe, but maybe you've been to vineyards in England or also even vineyards in California. I grew up in California and in Napa Valley, you can see these vineyards that they're cut into the hills. Okay. So the hills run this way and they're cut into the hills. And that's basically what's being described. And this is actually a usual way that a vineyard is cut. Usually, vineyards, we like think about them as flat. Those are orchards. Orchards are flat, vineyards aren't flat. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is the way that the trees or the grapes grow and the way that we want to nourish the roots requires them to be on some kind of hill. Okay, so we're trying to ascend, and this allegory as we're ascending is describing, this tree that's bearing fruit, and the fruit is not good fruit, and so they take some of the wild branches and they graft it in, and they take some of the natural branches and they graft it into some of these other trees in the lower portion, right, in the nether regions, right, which is out there. And so what we can take from this is there are these pieces of truth, right? We'll just start by saying that there are these pieces of truth that God has taken, right? These deep truths, and he's scattered them. And we know about this. We talk about the scattering and the gathering, and he's gathered and scattered these groups of people and these truths all out into these nether regions, right? Sometimes we call that the north. The word north actually is just the word for curse, and really what it means is, you're separated, right? You're scattered. And so we've been scattered. These truths are being scattered, and some of them bear good fruit, right? Sometimes they bear good fruit, and we needed those branches to go into those nether regions to preserve the fruit. And what does the Lord of the Vineyard say, right? He doesn't want to lose this tree. He'll do anything to keep from losing this tree. He'll prune it and dung it and do all these things over and over again because the tree itself is good. But sometimes these wild branches tend to overtake these good trees, and they bring forth this wild fruit that is not always good fruit. And so I'm going to liken this to the feminine, right? And of course, people who are listening likely already know the idea that a tree is represented often of the divine feminine, of a heavenly mother figure. And we see in Nephi, first Nephi, right? He's shown that the tree is a woman. He's shown that the fruit of the tree is Christ. These beautiful, beautiful images. And here we're getting these similar images, right? And Jacob goes so far as to call the tree the mother tree. He says it 4 times. It's the mother tree, the mother tree. And we're grafting in the truth of the mother tree in all these different places. And so let's apply that to us, right? God has scattered truth everywhere and this truth of the mother tree, but sometimes that mother tree brings forth fruit that is wild. And so there is kind of this caution. And I want to say, because the way that it's a lot of people talk about this is like, oh, learning about Heavenly Mother or learning about the divine feminine can become wild, right? You can become wild, or there are things that we look at that are scary to us. There can be sexual sin involved, or there can be, we've seen some of these I guess the word for them are religions or cults or whatever that spring up that end up taking this to the extreme, right? Taking things to the extreme, and sometimes that has ended up in like sexual sin and things like that. And so we have a big fear of that. But I just want to say that's not just the feminine, right? The masculine does it too. The masculine can be taken to an extreme, and we've seen that. And we've been living in the masculine extreme for a very long time. And so they both of these things, masculine and feminine, can have the extremes. But I would say part of the reason we're afraid of the feminine extreme or of the feminine is because we are so used to what we have. We're so used to the masculine because the masculine is like the sun. It's easy to see. It has structure. It's logical. It's something that is easy to follow and understand. Whereas the feminine is more like that river of water or a body of ocean or the moon, right? It's always changing. It's always shifting. It's always flowing. And so I think we have a fear, whether or not this fear is truly founded is one thing, but we do have this fear that if we go into something that's flowing, we're not going to get caught, right? We can more easily flow into darkness, or we can more easily flow into these wild places and produce this wild fruit and these scary things. And I think that's where this fear comes from is one, because the feminine really truly is the unknown. The feminine is the womb space, right? So like we think about the womb, it's dark, it's wet, it's creationary, but man, you just don't know what's in there, right? Like you do not know what is in the womb, right? It's being creative, and that is very scary. It is much easier to stay on this path that's well lit and known, and that you see structure, and there's signs that say go this way, then do this, then do that, rather than the feminine, which says, no, figure out yourself, find it for yourself, feel it for yourself, create it for yourself. And that can be really scary. And so I think that those two spaces are the fears we have, seeing some of this wild fruit in other cultures, maybe, and also just feeling like we don't know where this flow is going to take us.
Yeah, absolutely. I have noticed those themes too. And there definitely is also this hesitation that I've seen, particularly in some LDS communities, where it's like if I pursue the divine feminine, if I'm trying to pursue and learn about Heavenly Mother and ourselves as women, the good, if I pursue the good, I'm going to get caught up in the bad,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a negative feminine polarity, right? There
Mm-hmm.
is a
Mm-hmm.
counterpart to the adversary that is more on the feminine side of the spectrum. But I think what we don't realize is that that negative feminine polarity is already here. She's already in power. She's already obvious, right? Like she is Babylon. She is the whore of Babylon. If you go and read your scriptures, you can learn what are the characteristics of the negative feminine polarity. And then once you understand that, you see that actually pursuing the divine feminine is really great. It's really great for us because it continues our education to further us from that negative feminine polarity and distance ourselves and say, no, I'm going to choose the good fruit. I'm going to learn what that is and embody that and stop embodying this thing that is actually more natural to our world right now is that negative feminine. Another thing that comes to mind is just the importance of intention. I think
Mm-hmm.
that so many things, especially in this realm of the feminine, are not inherently good or bad. And that's really hard for us to understand, again, because of the masculine that we grow up in, that does say there are things that are inherently good and there are things that are inherently bad. And that's true in some respects. But when it comes to the feminine, that line is it's non existent, right? Things are not inherently good or inherently bad. Instead, it's what we bring to the table. So if we're pursuing this with a spirit of humility and love and gratitude and forgiveness, and we're trying to become more expansive, more abundant in our ways and in the way that we love other people, like that's a good intention. And that's going to keep you grounded in good things. If we come to the table with fear, if we come with a sense of, I need to control, I need to manipulate, I need to make myself comfortable. Like those are the things that could maybe take us off track. So it's a constant ebb and flow and constantly evaluating ourselves internally to say, where is my heart? And am I rooted in God? Am I rooted in Jesus Christ? That's the other thing that I wanted to say too. In my book, Consider Yourself as Eve, I talk about this pattern of spiritual development. And one of the great things about that path is that you can use it to remain grounded. So maybe you're feeling called to pursue the feminine, but you haven't been justified. You haven't received the Holy Ghost yet. You're working on that. You're aware of it. And like you're working every day. That's awesome. Keep working on that. Use that to ground you. And then the things that come in are going to be more appropriate for you. Whereas if you just say, I'm not really going to pay attention to my spiritual development, I'm just going to go all in and like learn everything that I can about the feminine, you're ungrounded. And that's going to possibly create some struggles for you down the road. There is a scenario where we learn too much too fast and we're not really spiritually mature enough to integrate it into our self. And so I would just put a plug for that as well, that there is a way, like there is a progression. And we really do need to be focused on where we are in that progression and developing through that progression. And if we do that, we're going to have a lot more safety in pursuing the other things that we feel called to.
Yeah, I really, really agree with that. Because the idea is not to choose one over the other, right? Like the idea is not to choose either the feminine or the masculine, right? Which sometimes is what it turns into is you either are on the feminine side or you're on the masculine side. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? Hugh Nibley wrote several essays about this. He talked about what is matriarchy, what is patriarchy, and he advocated for we need a little bit of both, right? We need both. We need a family archy, whatever
Mhm.
you would call that, right? Like we need a family archetype. We need
Mhm.
both a mother and a father, and there's good reason for that. And we need both masculine and feminine. So we need to stay rooted in Christ, but we also need that feminine role of being able to grow and develop spiritually and to be able to have that creative life force flow through us and give life. And that's a huge part of what we're here to do. And so I think, it's all about not trying to choose one over the other, not trying to demonize one over the other, but use them in balanced together.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that there's also a little bit of maybe conditioning or tradition or something that we as women have inherited that says that instills a fear in us because there's almost a fear of revealing ourselves, of
Mm,
unveiling ourselves, and of recognize our own power. Because
mm-hmm,
maybe if we recognize our power, we'll feel called to use our power, and we don't
mm-hmm,
necessarily feel like we have permission to do that. And I
mm-hmm.
believe that these feelings are generational and they have roots in some history and in historical things that have happened. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. And I do want to preface before I start talking about this when I'm talking about the history of all of this happening, right? This is not to demonize men at all, right? We're not doing this to demonize men. We're not doing this to demonize the masculine. We're also not doing this to basically to say that certain things are inherently bad, okay? Or certain religions are inherently bad in any way. Just putting that out there in the front. But we do have to acknowledge history and the way history has played out. So there's a great book on this that's called Swords and Chalice that a lot of people can look up and learn a lot from. But there's actually tons of books about this. But when we look at the archaeology of our history of the earth, we see in the beginning, if we go back to the oldest stuff we got, right? The oldest, like Sumeria and stuff like that,
Hmm.
all the oldest stuff we have includes a goddess figure, all of it. Every single nation, every single culture, all of them have some kind of goddess figure. And over time, we've seen and it appears as what and I'm literally talking about the times before we have like words. Okay. We're talking about I don't want to, it's not really cavemen times, but we're really
They
talking
use
like Neolithic.
pictographs,
Yeah,
yeah,
like they're
as they're
using
writing.
pictographs.
Hmm.
Yes, like Neolithic times. We find all of these goddess figurines. We find a order that's a little different than what we're seeing now. And we're finding that, the goddess was very, very important in those times. Not just the goddess, but also the god, right there. But she appears everywhere. She's the giver of life. And it makes sense, right? Because women bear life and they give life. And so we can see her in these pictographs and we can see these statues everywhere that's showing her as a great protectress and as a great life giver. And likely that women wore some of these necklaces or held her statues while they were giving birth to give them strength or and things like that. So they had all of these things. And then we even get to Israelite religions, and we get to the closest ancestors of Israelite religions, and we then see there's lots of evidence that Elat, that the goddess is there, right? Like we see her mentioned in the Bible multiple times, and it's interesting because and you've talked about this. David was on the podcast talking about this also, right? But over time, we see a shift in all of these cultures. We can look at the Aborigines, we can look at the Amazonian culture, we can look at the Israelite culture, and there's a shift. And there's a shift and more of a foreign force that comes in. And then we see that the goddess is pushed away and she's pushed down, and they've gotten rid of her statues. They bury a lot of stuff about her, and there's just a kind of this big like shift towards more of a patriarchal order. We see that. So one thing I want to mention, because this is just fascinating, is that these archaeologists, when we look at the way that family structures were, we can actually see that before it was that the man moved in with the woman, and because we can tell where she's sleeping and where she's staying throughout her life, and he comes in with her and her family. So it's very interesting because the order of things, and when we found some of these older Neolithic like bones and things like that, it's very clear that there was very much a matriarchal and a patriarchal order together, that these people were working together equally. And then we kind of see this patriarchal ideas coming kind of from the Syria region in lots of cases, come and take over. And that's not to say that men are bad or evil, or that the patriarchal order itself is evil. That's not what I'm saying at all. But
Hmm.
I'm just pointing out that archaeologically we can see that we did have, originally there was always a goddess there, and now she has been hidden for many, many reasons, right? And we see this throughout culture, throughout history, and even art. We see like the Black Madonna, right? She's painted black so that she's hidden, right? Because she's hidden, and these traditions of the mother get hidden. And then that's where we can kind of see the scattering. And we see that there are these other places, and I want to talk specifically more about the Celtic region, right? There are these places in these nethermost regions, in these cold places, that keep her traditions and that describe her so similarly as she is described in Israelite traditions. And so we see her sprinkled out, and she's survived in some of these places, but overwhelmingly, she's kind of been taken over time. Was that what you wanted?
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's great.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
you went back like a couple dec like 10,000 years further than
Yeah.
I was thinking, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're totally great. Yeah, and I just want to reiterate again, like we're not trying to like say anything negative about the masculine. Like we need the masculine. We need a healthy masculine, and a
Yeah.
healthy masculine is a balanced masculine, right? It's a masculine that permits the feminine in themselves and outside of themselves.
Mhm.
It shouldn't really be surprising to us that we have an unhealthy masculine form in this world, because that's what Satan is. Like he is an unhealthy, imbalanced, incomplete masculine who has no room for the feminine. And so it makes sense that like cultures that are influenced by that spirit are going to adopt those kinds of behaviors. But I was thinking a little bit more of like 14 to 1700. Can we talk a little bit about what was happening at that time and how that has come down to us through our epigenetics, and how that contributes to this idea of like fear and hesitation to lean into our femininity?
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And I start all the way back there. There's a reason for that, right? And the reason for that is just to show that like it's always been there, and this shift is both gradual as well as sudden in certain cases, and that's the way that culture works, right? And the way theology we can see working over time, that there is this shift in belief systems and everything like that. And so again, that's not to demonize, and this is, and just so everyone listening knows, this isn't like a fringe idea. Like what I
Hmm.
described is not fringe at all. It is like standard archaeology, and we can look back and it's very clear, right? This isn't just like me guessing or something like that. So,
Hmm.
when we talk about 14 to 1700, what we want to talk about there is, so there's this big push during this time, right? Specifically when we're talking about England, but this is actually really interesting because it's happening everywhere. It's
Hmm.
happening in Asia, it's happening even in the Amazon and things like that during this time. We start to have we start to see that the Catholic Church, like, they're okay with a lot of, there's this is the rise of the, like, the Roman Catholicism and everything like that. And for a while they're okay with the natives who are in this Celtic region, okay? So like the people who are in Ireland and Scotland, and they're living kind of peacefully with them, and they have different traditions as them. And then all of a sudden there is a legal document written called the witch's hammer, and there are people starting to accuse other people of doing witchcraft, right? And of doing evil things, casting evil spells on people, hurting evil people, all those kinds, are doing evil things to people. And women start to come under siege, and we all know about this. We usually see it from the Puritan side of things, right? From the American side of things, that, there were people being called witches. And that's only, I think,
1690 Salem, all of
yeah,
that.
say
Yeah.
this is like Salem and women being burned there. And comparatively, those were few women, just to say. Like the women in Salem, I think it's like 25 women or something like that.
Which
In
is that's a lot of women, to be
It
fair.
is
But
it is a
compared
lot.
to Europe, that's
Yes.
nothing.
But
Yeah.
in Europe, we're talking about literally just under a million women, right? Like we're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of women being burned, right? And also we have the Spanish Inquisition as well, right? This is close in time. There starts to be this movement of, if you're not with us, you're against us. If we see you doing something evil, if we think what you believe is evil, we are going to, interrogate you, which involves torture, and we're going to burn you, and we're going to do all these things to you. So, women start, part of the witch's hammer, this legal document they had, right, was that if you called someone a witch, then you or the church could absorb that person's land if that person was a witch. So if that, let's say I called Megan a witch, and I was like, Megan's a witch. I go to the authorities, they arrest Megan, they decide Megan's a witch, and they do it, they burn her, or whatever they do, then I or the church could absorb that land and it would be mine. And so then it became very it was very wealthy, like a very wealthy tradition. You could get a lot of money because land really is money back then, right? Like land is money. And so you could absorb someone else's land, you could absorb all those things. And so it became really lucrative to have women be burned. Not all women were burned, like some women were drowned. There was lots of things that happened to many of these women, but it also was very much in the witch's hammer, like it's like the proper thing for women to do is to tell on each other, right? So like the proper thing for a woman to do is to tell that somebody else is a witch. And it made this kind of perversive culture of women um comparing themselves to each other, women talking behind each other's backbiting, seeing each other as competitors, and this feeling of, if you live, then I have to die, right? But if you die, I live. And it really became incredibly divisive, and it was really very much this submission of, do, join the Catholic Church or join the Protestant Church or die, for many people. And so that has left a mark, I would say, on women. And we can actually see this. So what Megan was referring to epigenetically, right? Like I said, I worked in research for a long time. And one of the things I was really fascinated with during that time is epigenetics. And if people don't know what epigenetics is, it's the fact that our environment affects our genes and what our genes do and how our genes play out, and whether or not this is totally simplifying it, but whether or not they're turned on or turned off. And so what we've found in the study of epigenetics is that actual emotions, that they can be encoded into your genes. That's part of the same way that like whales, without going there ever, can have this instant pool to know exactly where to travel to, right? They can migrate and know how to migrate. And we see this in thousands of animals. It's the same thing. Our ancestors' experience gets encoded into our DNA. And so for many, many women and for us, a lot of this fear is so pervasive because so many of us have these genes, right? We have these genes that come from Europe and even these other places where this was happening. But like we have these European genes and we have this mark on us that some people call this the witch wound. Okay. So this idea that epigenetically we have this deep fear and that women have this deep fear to be seen. You know, we have these fears about like being compared, being outed, being seen as a witch, being called a witch. And I can tell you, everyone still feels that today. I think most women in the church would be devastated if someone called them a witch, right? And so we live with this, and this fear is so pervasive because we're so scared I'm going to die because somebody's going to call me a witch. So I better get as far away from that as possible.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that history. And I just want to kind of like maybe hit this home a little bit too of like, why are we talking about this on an LDS podcast? Like, why does this matter in the tradition of Jesus Christ? Right. Because I think there's sometimes a disconnect. First off, I want to say like the women that were called witches, they weren't evil. Like they weren't
Yeah.
satanic even. They were herbalists, they were
Mm-hmm.
midwives, they probably knew how to heal spiritually. Like they were called wise women. That's what witch meant, right? So these were just wise women. These were ascended women that were perceived as a threat, that were attacked. And this isn't the first time, right? Because as we've talked about, there seems to be this theme throughout human history where God is trying to bring the mother tree down, right? Like we're trying to bring the divine feminine in to the story more, and it keeps getting taken out and corrupted and like twisted. So you talked about how in the Israelite tradition we see that divine feminine, and when she is taken out of the temple is 25 years before Lehi and his family leave Jerusalem. Okay. In the Bible, it says, well, we got rid of all those things because they were idols and they were bad and they were evil. But then they're destroyed less than 30 years later, which says maybe they weren't evil. Maybe they took out something that was actually good and true. At the same time that Lehi left, there was another group called the Rechabites. And these people went up to Ireland. They went up to Britain. They went to that Celtic region that we're talking about, and they melded into the culture there because they realized that their religions were basically the same. And it was because of that feminine piece that was trying to be preserved. And the Celts had that. Like they had basically, it was like figuring out, oh, we've both got two branches and they're the same branch. Like they go right together in this tree, right? So it's really important for us, I think, as LDS women to recognize where feminine history has been and again, how that's impacting us right now. This is the fullness of times. I talk about that a lot on the show. And the reality is that we are going through a divine feminine restoration. People in the church, lots of people outside of the church, the whole world globally is feeling this pull to the divine feminine. We're going to complete the mother tree, just as it talks about at the end of Jacob 5, right? Where eventually they are able to successfully establish the mother tree and graft all the truth together, circumscribe all that truth back into one great whole. And our heavenly parents need women who are prepared to do that work. They need women who understand the feminine side of the gospel, which is pieces that we can see in these other traditions that fit perfectly within ours. One of the things we were talking about before the show is about how Joseph Smith said that Mormonism is all truth. So if we find truth, no matter where we find it, that is supposed to be a part of our religion. That is a part of the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I think that this conversation is really important for us to have, to know where we as women have been and also where we're being called to go. We're being called to heal. We're being called to turn that witch wound over to the Lord and say, Lord, please heal this because you need me to shine. You need me to be seen. You need me to not be afraid of what men or other women can do to me. You need me to stop comparing myself to others and see my own worth. So please take this and heal this. And then we're going to learn how to collaborate with each other how to bring these feminine things back into the picture and the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I know we only have a little bit of time, but I really want to hear, like, where are some of the areas that we can begin to pull on those feminine threads, again, at the same time that we're staying rooted in the process of spiritual development, in that temple template, in our relationship to God, and continually healing these things as they come up for us.
Well, just like we've talked about, right? We've talked about Jacob 5 and how God has scattered this truth everywhere. And because a lot of our traditions, the mother has been taken out so much, we kind of have to find those scattered pieces, those threads, like you called them, and we can see them in other religions. And I just want to reiterate what you said, right? So many prophets have reiterated what Joseph Smith said, that all truth, right? Mormonism is all truth. And we look for the good and the positive. This is something that Gordon B. Hinckley said, which was, we look for the good and the positive in every faith, for there is goodness in them all. Dallin A. Jokes has said, we believe there's truth in all religions. All religions teach principles of truth and righteousness. So it's okay to learn from other truths and other religions, right? It's okay to learn from them. And I think sometimes we get really scared to do that because we're like, we are the one true church. We must have everything, and they don't have anything. But these are apostles and prophets telling us, no, other churches have truth, right? Um, and we can learn from all of these truths, especially when we're looking for a truth that is very scattered and that has been stamped out in so many places. And so, one of the places we need to start looking for is archetypes. We need to look in other religions and see those archetypes. And where I think the mother has survived the most, I mean, I shouldn't say the most. She's survived a lot in Asia as well, but she's survived mostly in this Celtic region that we've been talking about and the earth-based practices there. Um and so we can see her because they talk about this. They also have traditions in Egypt. I'd say like those are three of the big hubs that we can look at. And I know you've talked about Egypt a little bit, right? And so
Mhm.
we probably want to pull on some of these threads from these earth-based practices to help us understand a little bit more about the divine feminine. So should we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this region that we're looking at is really fantastic because there was a pre existing tradition and gospel. And then there were Israelites like Lehi at the same time as Lehi, with the same understanding of Lehi, that said, we don't want to go along with what you're doing anymore because it's a false religion and you're about to get destroyed, called the Rechabites, who came up here and joined with, they melded perfectly together because they had the same faith. So I just want to reiterate that.
Yeah, and actually we see that melding together a second time, right?
Mm.
After that. So after according to some traditions, and if we want to look at things like the Knights Templar and the tradition of the bloodline of Christ, again, the Knights Templar, that's where they go. They escape the Catholic
Mhm.
Church by going to Scotland and by melding with these people and teaching these people. So we get a lot out of this. There's lots of traditions of Christ in this area, and that's why it's so important. So let's talk a little bit about this. Okay, so in this region and this area, and again, I just want to say before I say this, I am not trying to add anything to our Godhead. I am not trying to change the way that we see anything. I am merely using this as an archetype that we can learn from and pull some threads of truth from. Okay. So I'm not trying to replace anything. So in this region, typically in earth-based practices, they actually, instead of having a trinity, a male trinity, they have a female trinity instead. And so where we have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, they have what they call the maiden, the mother, and the crone, or maiden, mother, matriarch is another way people talk about it. Now, and they look at this trinity in a really interesting way. Um, and the way that they look at this, not just as, we look at our male, and of course I don't want to say like we have a trinity in that they're the same person. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying three male gods that make up the godhead. That's what I mean by trinity. They have three female gods that make up their godhead. And not only are these goddesses that help them and that are important, they're also trying to show you the change and the cyclical nature of the feminine. That's why they're maiden, mother, and crone.
Hmm. And
Because
our progression, sorry, I just want to add this too. Our progression is deeply tied into our physical development, right? Like
yeah,
our
totally.
bodies are such important vessels for us as women. So in my book, when I talk about priestesshood, I talk about how the offices of the priestesshood align with our spiritual and our physical development, right? And so you can almost categorize the 7 archetypes that I pull out from the scriptures, which are virgin, handmaid, that's like the maiden phase,
Hmm.
the bride, wife, mother, that's the mother phase, and then the crone phase, which crone just means crowned one. Did you say
Yep,
that? I probably
yep.
said that.
Crone means crowned one.
That's like the queen wife, queen mother. So like it's just a different way to illustrate the same ideas. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's important to pull out in earth-based practices, there's a really big, and any feminine practice, there's a huge emphasis on cycles. Okay, and cycles and life cycles, that this idea that everything is death, rebirth, growth, maturity, death again, right? Everything is creation, this creation cycle. We see this every year in the seasons. We see this even with Christ, right? That's why he dies and he's reborn again. He is also an archetype of this. And so that's why the maiden, the mother, and the crone are just there to show us our own progression, our own cyclical archetype. And in this tradition, they each kind of rule different parts of the year. And so it's like they've died and been reborn. And so like in the fall time, that's the crone's era, right? Because the crone or the matriarch rules this fall into winter season because she's that death portion, right? She is being wise. She is the part of us that is, has learned all the things and is ready to give back, right? In the fall, the trees give up their leaves and they give back to the earth. Things die in order to give back to the earth, in order for things to be nourished and to have that nourishing. Just like our feminine cycle, like our actual literal cycles, right? We have to shed our uterine lining and we have to have a bleed. And at the same time that we're having a bleed, our body is using that bleed to start building up lining again. Okay, to start nourishing our bodies again. That's really important. So that's the same thing. And then, of course, in that winter to spring phase, that's when we have the maiden, right? That's when things are waking up, things are sprouting in the belly, and she's young. And then in the summertime, right, the spring summer, she becomes a mother, right? And she becomes the mother, and the mother is not. I just want to hit on this because I think a lot of people who have not given birth or who have not been married may feel like, oh, this isn't really for me. Or, what are you saying about me and my progression? I can't progress if I'm not a mother. That's not true at all. That's not what we're saying at
All
all.
women are mothers. I
All
talk
women
about
are
this in my
mothers.
book. All women are mothers. We all give life in a
Yes.
million ways. So
Mm-hmm.
we are all mothers. That is the role of a mother, and that is what women do.
Yep. And so even if you never have a child, right, you are still in the mother phase. You're still giving life to things. Like after you've been a child and you've taken from your parents and then you start to be on your own, you hit that threshold age, then which is 21, I would say. When you hit that threshold age, then you switch into more of the mother role because then you're starting to learn how to give life, how to be independent, and you're learning all of those things so that you can eventually get into that crone stage where you're then actually giving back. Because not that the mothering stage isn't giving back, of course you're giving back, you're giving to your children and your soul, but in the crone stage you're a little more independent, right? You've done that, you've sent them off, and so you full time you can be the wise one, right? You can come back
Hmm.
and be wise and help other people with your wisdom. And so we use, this is just an example, we can use this archetype from this other religion and the way that that religion works and the cyclical nature of that religion to learn about what the divine feminine looks like. Because I promise you, the divine feminine is like the moon. It is ever changing. It is always changing,
Hmm.
but the cycle is the same, right? The
Hmm.
cycle is rooted. The cycle is constant, but the change, the variation continues and continues. It's an upward spiral. And that is
Hmm.
what the divine feminine is. It is a slow upward spiral. And we're always creating, no matter what we're doing. We're always giving life to something. We're always dying, and then we're being reborn over and over again.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you. And we are coming in, I would say we're in a waxing gibbous phase of the moon right now because she has we've had a full moon in the past, as we're talking about, that's waned. There was a new moon where she was really removed, and we are now going through again that gaining momentum, gaining more light, more knowledge, and like she is coming back into a fullness. And we, as her daughters, are integral to that. Like we are a part of that. That is our priestesshood. That is why we're here, is to shine with her, right? And to be a part of others coming to see her and coming to shine. All that said, Julie, you're wonderful. Thank you so much for a really enlightening and fun conversation. If you're ready to continue this work with guidance and shared language, I invite you into the Hidden Wisdom app, where faith is supported through renovation and expansion. If this episode resonated, please consider liking, sharing, or subscribing, especially with someone you feel would be strengthened by this conversation. You can also send a donation to Hidden Wisdom via Megan Farner on Venmo. Link is in the description. These are some of the simplest ways to support this work and help it reach those who are quietly seeking. Until next time, trust what is unfolding. There is hidden wisdom all around you.